Today, we're lucky to have Dr. Ravi to give a talk on Asiatic lions. He done his studies, I think, 1985. He started studying that Asiatic lions. I mean, he's the best person to do that. I mean, we don't need an introduction. I mean, I think he will also give a small brief about it. He also worked with quite a few other NGOs and Madras Crocodile Bank, and now he's a CEO of Metastring Foundation. And thank you so much, sir. I think over to you. You can take over from there.
Thanks, David. I want to begin by thanking Alappuzha National Society, Kottayam Nature Society, and David especially for making this possible, and the wonderful response we've received from people all around the world. I think the way it's structured is I have between 45 to 55 minutes to give the presentation, and the balance time will be used for a discussion, question and answers. So I thought I would quickly give an overview of the ecology of the lions in India, and also discuss some of the pressing conservation challenges that we've been working on. Well, this is the animal we're going to be talking about today, the male of the species. As most of you know, lions are very clearly sexually dimorphic. The male and the female are very distinct. And lions are also the only social large cat. So just take you through some pictures here. And this picture especially pay attention because it's a very rare picture, and I will explain later in the presentation why I call it in the Gir context. The reason I put together these introductory pictures is most people don't see lions in this manner. Most of the touristy locations of lions are very, very different. Gir is a very dry habitat, and we have 7 perennial rivers draining the forest, and they are in many ways the lifeline of the forest. And dry stream beds are excellent places for lions to rest during the hotter periods of the day. The monsoon is a major influence on the ecology of Gir, and not just in terms of the lion, but more fundamentally the vegetation, the prey species, and therein the impact it has on the lions. And if you had noticed earlier pictures were all shades of gray and brown and yellow, and the rains come and the habitat transforms almost magically. In no time, you see grass grow, the leaves sprout, and it's a completely different view of the habitat. It does, in terms of vegetation density, change certain things, especially prey choice and predation pattern, and the dispersal of water also changes the movement patterns of animals. Now, as most of you might know, Karthik, how do I minimize this message on top? I'm not able to see my screen. It keeps saying see waiting room. Karthik, are you there? Can you help me, please?
So that will keep on popping up. You just ignore it. We'll take care of it.
Okay. No, the reason is I myself are not able to see the screen. I don't know how it is for you guys.
Okay. It's safe for us. We'll take care of it. No worries.
Okay.
A lot of people are joining. That's why. Sorry.
Okay. So this is a map primarily of South and West Asia. And if you look where my cursor is, that's the African continent. And this is where the lions evolved. And through a process of natural dispersal, they moved right across Iraq, present-day Iraq, Iran, possibly Afghanistan, Pakistan, through much of central, north, and even as far east as Bihar in India. Lions should have existed in their thousands across this large swath of Asia, especially in India, but largely due to human action and primarily the discovery of firearms and their widespread use in India for hunting is what has primarily caused the reduction in their distribution as well as numbers. So you see this little triangle, that's more or less where Gir forest is in Saurashtra Peninsula of Gujarat. And for more than now, what, 140 years or 130 years, lions in India have been restricted to this patch of forest. The last lions outside of India in Asia were reported near Disful in Iran in the mid-late 1940s. And this whole distribution map has been created using hunting records and shikar notes and natural history notes. A question that's often asked of me is, how do you know a lion is? And in half jest, I say that the only definitive way of saying whether it's an Asiatic or an African lion is if you see a lion in Africa, it's African, and if you see a lion in India, it's Asian. Simply because there are really no morphological diagnostic features that enables us to distinguish between Asiatic and African lions. Here's a picture of a male Asiatic lion, and you see this belly fold. That's characteristic of Asiatic lions. All Asian lions have them. But it's complicated by the fact that a certain proportion of African lions also have belly folds. So the presence of the belly fold is not diagnostic. The absence is. So if lions don't have belly folds, they're African. But if they have it, it's difficult to say. The other feature is the top of the head here. It's more or less like me, bald at the top. The ears are very distinct. So the mane is not as luxuriant. But again, this is not diagnostic. There is a certain percentage of African lions which are like this, and there are even maneless lions in Africa. But if a lion has a luxuriant mane and you're not able to see the top of the head or the ears, that's definitely African. But if it is like this, it could be African or it could be Asian. But all Asian lions would have a belly fold and a sparse mane. And here you have a lioness. The belly fold is not quite as distinct, but you can still see it there. Now, why are we so concerned about these lions? Because in many ways, we are lucky to have them survive in the wild. These numbers give you a sense of how close they were to being extinct. There's a under 12 equal to a less than 20, and as recently as 1920, only about 50 animals. I don't pay too much attention to the accuracy of these numbers, but I think what is important for us to note is that they've gone through what's called as a genetic bottleneck. They went down to very low numbers, and they have been quite successful, largely through human intervention, protection, and management in coming back. The last official census was conducted 5 years ago, and their numbers is something in the region of 570 lions. But most estimates nowadays, the census is supposed to take place now, but due to COVID-19, that's not happened this May. But most estimates currently put that the population anywhere between 600 to 800 lions, of which roughly 50% of these lions are not within the protected area, but in human-dominated habitats. And we will talk about that a little later. So the takeaway message from this particular slide is really the fact that they had a close brush with extinction. Their numbers have really gone up. They've recovered brilliantly. They've gone through the genetic bottleneck. And now it's a problem of actually managing success. How do we manage success? This is a map of the Gir protected area. The central dark green has the status of a park. It's about 250 square kilometers. The surrounding light green has the status of a wildlife sanctuary, and that is about 1450 square kilometers. But 50% of the lion population is outside in human-dominated. From a management perspective, the protected area is divided into 3 zones. The western part is called Sanctuary West, and then you have the National Park, and the eastern part is called Sanctuary East. Bulk of the tourism takes place in this region with the headquarters out of Sasan. and there is absolutely no tourism within the national park. And even in Giris, there are a few temples, but wildlife tourism itself doesn't take place there. A couple of pictures to give you a sense of the habitat that we are dealing with. It's dry deciduous non-forest. It is not flat savanna land. It's a series of low rolling hills. And this is a good view of bulk of what it looks like. The Central National Park tends to be a little more rugged than the rest of the habitat. These regions get about 900 millimeters of rainfall, primarily through the monsoon season from about mid-June till about late September if you're lucky. You get into the forest, this is what it looks like, dominated by stunt with acacias and behonias, and sisyphus being the other major tree species. As you go east, it takes a more African look. It does get a little flat, but the more ecologically important thing is that because of lower rainfall,
So sorry to butt in between. I think your voice is cracking in between.
okay, should I speak louder? Is that better?
Yeah, louder. Probably switch off your video also.
Okay. Now I need to figure that out.
That's okay. I'll close it.
Okay. The canopy opens out, the canopy comes down, and it's more like the thorn savanna of Africa. But let that picture not give any false notion. The lions of Gir are really lions of forest. This is a good picture to illustrate that. These are not animals of the savanna, these are not animals of the grasslands. And these are animals that live on deer, not on antelopes. This is the only time I've seen a lion in a cave. Many of us in our school, English, would have read about Aesop's fable, and there's a story of the lion and the lion living in caves. Lions in Gir, and I think across most of its habitat, don't necessarily live. They live in the normal habitat. They sleep under vegetation, prefer cooler parts of the habitat, primarily dry stream and river beds. The other large cat that coexists with the lions are the leopards. There's a very large and thriving population of leopards in and around Gir. And what enables this is the leopards are smaller in size, lighter animals, extremely arboreal. They're able to get out of harm's way by climbing onto trees. This is the socio-economic context in which the lions survive.
Sir, sorry to butt in. Your voice is again cracking.
Okay.
Probably remove that headset and try to talk just directly into the.
I will try that, but I've always found the headset works better, but I will try that.
Okay.
Is it better now?
I think it's better. Yeah.
Okay, fine. This is the socio-economic context in which the lions survive. In a 10-kilometer radius around the forest, you have nearly 100 villages, 150,000 people with about 100,000 livestock. And within the forest, you have more than 50 settlements called nesses. And these are all dated data. This is more than 20 years. I'm sure the numbers would have gone up now. 2,500 people with about 10,000 livestock. There are 14 forest settlement villages, which had about 400 people with more than 4,000 livestock. And this is the context in which the lions and the leopards are surviving. And this is not taking into account the much larger area that lions have now started occupying. These are the Maldaris. They live within the forest. They graze land, and that is their means of livelihood. And in those, they used to primarily use camels and horses as a means of transport. Increasingly, motorized transport has come, and people have started using motorcycles. This is primarily the livestock they keep, buffaloes. A typical herd would be in the region of about 50 heads of cattle, of which about 35 to 40 would be buffaloes. The remaining would be cows and one or two camels and maybe a horse or two. They are allowed to graze right through the protected area other than in the national park. National park is completely protected and no human activity is allowed. These are their dwellings, what are called messes, enclosed, no electricity, no running water. They are primarily located close to perennial sources of water, as water is essential both for themselves and their livestock. And they have specified watering holes, which is a bit of a problem because these kind of densities in a semi-arid habitat where water is a scarce resource, especially in summer, means that wildlife doesn't have access to these kind of watering places, especially during time, plus the risk of disease, because most of the Maldari livestock doesn't get veterinary. This is a photo taken very early in the morning, extremely hardworking, hospitable people, manual labor. As I said, there's no electricity. Here, they're churning yogurt to make butter. And those days, the clarified butter, which is ghee, was their product of commerce. I'm told now increasingly liquid milk is being sold directly to dairy farms, to dairy units, because refrigerated trucks are able to pick up the milk. The major prey species of deer, cheetal, the most common, sambar, and nilgai. There are a few other prey species, chinkara, chausinga, wild pig, langur, and porcupines are the recorded prey species for lions. And on top of that, of course, domestic livestock, which is buffalo, cows, donkey, horses, and maybe a camel or two. Our estimates for cheetal nearly 20, 30 years ago was in the region of about 45,000 cheetal, sambar in the region of 5 to 6,000 sambar, and both of them are very preferred prey. Here is a well-fed lion. Hungry lions can eat sometimes up to 40 kilos of meat in a single eating, and they have what is called as a feast and famine routine. They can go without food, sometimes even up to 10, 12 days. And when they're really hungry, they can consume that amount of meat. See from its protruding abdomen that this is a very well. What are the tools they need? The canine teeth that you see, there are two in the lower jaw and two in the upper jaw. These are the killing means, the tools that they use to kill. And of course, their paws, which are not very well represented in this picture, because the claws are what helps them to bring the prey down, and then they bite them to either go through the windpipe and suffocate them, or they cut through the artery or the backbone in the neck, basically to then paralyze them. Extremely efficient feeders. This is the remains of a cheetal stag. There you can see the velvet antlers have also been chewed upon. This was a pair of male lions who hadn't fed anything substantial for about a week, 10 days. I'd been following them 24 hours for that period. Caught them when they'd scavenged on a dead buffalo, and they were well fed. And when they came, when they followed them, they were not killing anything. And then 4 o'clock one morning, I heard some noise. I didn't go in. At dawn, I went in, and in a couple of hours, they had completely cleaned up the kill. Here, lions also hide their kills, even though since they're social, very often within a day, bulk of what is available to be eaten is fed upon. But occasionally, whatever remains are left, they will store them in thorn-enclosed habitats like this, primarily to keep it away from avian scavengers like crows and vultures. Otherwise, they really have nothing to fear. Pictures of lions feeding close up. Since they don't have knives and forks, they really have to find ways and means of removing the meat from the carcass even after the animal is dead. And that's what the lion is doing. It's applying what are called as carnassial teeth or modified molars to bite off chunks of meat. They don't chew their food, they swallow it whole. Here you have a good view of its paws, and these are not even fully spread. And when spread, the paws are much bigger, and how it stabilizes the meat, the carcass before it bites in. A few more pictures of lions feeding. Here you find a female with young feeding on a cheetal carcass. And here a lone female on a male nilgai carcass. It's an interesting story behind this. Is a radio called female. If you look closely, you can see the brown, dark brown colored radio collar around the neck. She weighed only about 110 kilograms. And here she is on a nilgai carcass upwards of 250 kilograms. And she didn't kill it by biting through the neck or the nostrils. She actually had, probably because her mouth wouldn't have gone around such a girth, she had basically paralyzed the female, the male by biting through the backbone and then diving underneath and taking a big bite of its abdomen. So early morning when I saw this nilgai, it was sitting out in the sun at about 9 o'clock, and it was hot, really hot. It was May, and I had no idea why it would sit in the hot sun. And then on watching through a binocular, flecks of blood coming out through its nostril, and in a couple of hours it keeled over and died, and she only came later in the evening to feed on the carcass. Lions still continue to feed on livestock, both within and outside the park. Here is feeding on a buffalo carcass within the park. This is a picture of a female guarding its kill outside a park. Lions inside and outside the park are two very different animals. Inside the park, they're much more easier to handle. They're much less irritated. While outside the park, because people are constantly harassing them, approaching them closely, throwing stones and all kinds of negative interaction, they're much more irritated. And when I was working, a lot of which was on foot, I would be very, very careful approaching lions outside the park. Now, here's an example of the variation in diet. The blue colored table shows you data from two habitats which are not part of the protected area. The Girnar forest is a small patch of forest which does have some wildlife, but still 55% of the diet there is domestic livestock. Those two habitats is primarily human-dominated habitat with acacia and prosopis plantations. There are some nilgai there, and you can see how much you have livestock there as its diet. The first quantitative study of lions was done by Paul Jocelyn in 69 to 71. He did his field work, and he reported that 75% of what the lions were feeding then was livestock. And when I did my field work between 85 and 90, I found that there was almost a complete reversal of its diet. You find that now 75% of what the lions were feeding was wild prey, and the balance was livestock. What caused this change? Primarily a management intervention, actually two management interventions. When Jocelyn was doing his studies, just as the monsoon rain came and the high production season for the vegetation was going to be there, migratory livestock from as far as Kutch, which is a few hundred kilometers away from Gir, would congregate and feed on the growing vegetation. That made sure that the resident wild prey population had very little access to the nutritious food. And hence their population was kept under control, wasn't the level at which it should be based on the productivity of the Gir habitat. So Jocelyn and Berwick, who studied ungulates, based on their studies, made a recommendation to the government that the migratory livestock should not be allowed to come in during the growth period of the plants. And that happened in the mid-70s. Another recommendation was to create the national park, which meant that at least some part of the protected area was free, completely free of direct human intervention. Of course, things like climate change will act even on the national park, and that is a human cost impact. But direct impacts like livestock grazing, tourism, was not to be allowed within the national park. So these two has enabled the wild prey population to rebound, and lions and leopards have definitely tracked this, and that's why you see this change in their predation pattern. Also, killing livestock would be a lot easier. So why are lions in trouble of feeding on wild prey? Simply because livestock is associated with people. People don't like lions to kill their livestock. People are going to try and defend their livestock, especially there were numerous occasions when Jocelyn and Berwick were doing their field studies in the late 60s and early 1970s, when lions and leopards used to jump into a Maldari settlement, the thorn enclosed nest, at night and kill animals. But their chances of feeding on them was next to zero, because the livestock herd would stampede. People will come with their torches and their sticks and their axes. And basically, that meant that there was no possibility of them feeding on the prey. So they put in all the effort of trying to kill and hunt, but they were not getting the chance to prey. So there was a lot of energy wasted in that process. While if you kill a wild prey, the lions get to keep it. There's really no human intervention. So what is the summary from the kill data? There is distinct seasonal variation in the diet composition of the lions. Wild prey killed much more during summer. Our ecological explanation is water is a restricted resource, while they congregate around water resources, and that gives the lions a far better chance of hunting them, simply because water sources often have much better. And with greater densities, there will always be predation prone, there's greater predation prone prey animals available for the lions. Livestock is still an important prey base. When I did my studies, there were two ways I looked at predation ecology. One was doing scat analysis, basically picking up lion and leopard droppings, washing them, picking hair and analyzing, looking through a microscope which species it was. And the other one was to find carcasses and then become a bit of a Sherlock Holmes, find out what happened, where was it killed, what is the habitat, and so on and so forth. So from scat data, when I did my studies, lions' diet was about 75% livestock. From kill data, it is about 65. Variation is that simply because livestock deaths, livestock predation is often reported to us. So you have a head start in trying to find out livestock carcasses. And livestock is also often killed in more open, closer to human settlements. While it is not always possible to locate every single wild ungulate kill. So we feel that scat is a much better and unbiased representation of the diet composition of the lions. And so by that, we understand that about 75% of the lion's diet is wild prey. Amongst livestock, even though cows formed a much smaller proportion of the prey base, they were preferred, they were killed much more often. Cows in general are smaller in numbers, smaller in body size, and they tend to bolt when lions are found, when they encounter lions. Buffaloes have the ability of ganging together and coming at lions. I've seen on a couple of occasions 3-4 buffaloes more or less locking their horns and charging at lions. And if it's just a single or two lions, lions would not take the risk of trying to hunt such herds of buffalo. So that's probably the reason that the lions are killing more cows. And in livestock, even though subadult and young animals are found, because they are taken better care of by the herdsmen, by the Maldaris, we find they are not killed as often as you would expect from a proportion of their numbers. We talked about lions being social, and as you all know, a group of lions is called a but very often in popular belief, the lion is the king of the forest and so on and so forth. The males actually don't really form the pride. The pride is formed by a bunch of related females, typically numbering from 2 to 15, and their dependent offspring. Pride sizes in Gir tend to be, on an average, smaller than what you find in places like Serengeti. And obviously, males are required for a variety of reasons, especially to mate and produce young. And males are organized in groups, what we call as coalitions. Typically, male coalitions range in size from 2 to 7. 7 is very unusual, 2 to 3 is more normal, but 2 to 5 is not unusual. But as recent data from Mina's study will show, and that's something I would present, there are questions really being asked from the data whether lions and Gir are moving away from sociality. The social bonds as a reflection of numbers seems to be much weaker at this point of time. And males typically are unrelated to the pride, and that's a good reason to avoid inbreeding. And their tenure can range from anything from a few months to a few years. The tenure of anything more than 4 to 5 years is very unusual. So this is what a pride would look like. You can see 3 adult females there, and young of varying ages. And as I said, females will definitely be related to each other. And here you see 2 males sleeping under a banyan tree. And here 3 males of 5 male coalition. I had 1 radio-collared animal male here out of the 5 males. And through my 2.5 years of radio tracking, I only saw the 5 males together 2 or 3 times. So male coalitions, while these are friendly males who would like to be together, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be together. You sometimes see them as subsets. You can even sometimes find them. So male cubs at best can stay in what is called as their natal pride, the pride in which they were born, for a maximum of 3 years. All male cubs, as they get to that age, will have to leave. Depending on whether there's a single male or multiple males of that age, either they will disperse together or they will have to disperse as just a single male. Now, typically there would be other single males also dispersing, and then by some chance, 2 single males who have dispersed will cross their paths, and if they get along well together, they will then form a 2 male coalitions. Sometimes you can have 2, 3, 4, 5 males born through several litters of related females ready to disperse at the same age. When groups of young male disperse in larger numbers, they are the coalition. They very seldom would actually join up with other single males to form coalitions. And these are all related males, and there is what is called as inclusive fitness. So there is great benefits in sticking together, and there is strength in numbers. Larger the coalition, typically the chances of them going out and finding weaker males and fighting with them and dispossessing them of their territory, their chances are much. If weaker, older territorial males don't get the message and try to stay on and fight, and they are overpowered, and if the younger males can get hold of them, they will not hesitate to kill those males. So it is in their benefits for the older males, as they realize they're losing their territories, to abandon and move out. And when they move out, they become nomadic. So the main life, there are 2 phases of nomadism. One, when males disperse from their natal pride and they form coalitions, and then they grow up, gain strength and confidence, and then they become territorial. And the other phase, which is the last phase of their life, when they lose territory but survive that takeover, and then they become nomadic. I was lucky to have, but I shouldn't say lucky, I was able to observe one male, a territorial male, lose his territory. He was a radio-collared animal, and he lost his territory under somewhat tragic circumstances. There was a forest department strike for a few days in '88, and the protection levels dipped a bit, and the coalition partner was shot dead. And so from a two male coalition, the radio collared male became a single male. And obviously that meant that the other males waiting to take over recognized that, because there were not two males roaring. The scent marking wasn't as frequent. And then they came over and took over the territory. And it was very interesting to observe the radio collar, the ex-territorial male's behavior. He stopped roaring. Lions roar regularly, and this guy used to roar very, very regularly. The minute he lost his territory, he stopped roaring. And within a matter of days, he even started losing his mane. It looks like it is physiological. Testosterone levels are probably going down. And the advantage in doing this is, from a distance, other males could mistake him for a female. If they find him to be a nomadic, old, and weak male, other males will come and attack. So it's a survival strategy. I'm going to skip this, don't worry. So this is data I'm going to present from Meena's work. Meena was my PhD student. She did this, her field work in the early 2000s. And it's very, very interesting data, both on ranging, but more importantly on social organization. Look at this. What is the male group size? The mean size is about 1.4 plus minus 0.5. So that's putting it at roughly 1.4 to 2. And it ranged from 1 to 3. It's from a fairly robust data set there, 283 sightings. And historically, we have these three data sets, which tell us that male group sizes haven't been very large in Gir. Jocelyn found it to be about 2.1. I found it about 2.2. But Meena's is less than 2. It's very much less than 2. It's 1.2. But what's interesting is that even in females, Meena found numbers fairly low. And that's telling us something. We don't have an ecological explanation for it. These are fairly robust data sets, and there's something happening out here. Early on, I showed a picture of a male lion with a female and a couple of cubs, and I said that's a rare photograph from Gir. That's simply because, unlike in Africa, male-female associations is very rare. Obviously, the bulk of the sightings of males and females together is when they are mating. Otherwise, occasionally you see them on large kills, and sometimes you just don't know the reason, which is what we call associated. Associated is only 10% of the data that Meena has, while up to 70% was only due to mating. So the denser habitats of Gir may be the fact that the bulk of the prey is cheetal, which is fairly small in size. And if one or more males are hanging around with the pride, then the chances of the females and the cub to get enough to feed might be diminished. Who knows what is driving? Equally importantly, the dense forested habitat probably gives much better stalking cover, even for a large male, with its very promiscuous and very much advertised mane. In a grassland, it can stick out like a sore thumb, but the forest gives it its cover. And don't forget, livestock is still a very significant part of the diet, and it's probably subsidizing the male's ability to live reasonably independently of the pride from a predation and feeding point of view. Males do associate with the female. Here is a picture of a male lion exhibiting a behavior called phlegm. It's basically testing the reproductive availability of the female there. If you see a male and female like this, a male more or less glued to her, you can rest assured that it's a mating pair. Mating is a fairly, what shall I say, aggressive, noise-filled and action-filled spectacle. A pair of lions can mate anything from 3 to 7 days. The first day is kind of quiet relatively, and then it gets more active. In the peak of the time, they can mate as often as 3 or 4 times an hour. There's a lot of noise out there, and for good reason. Simply because when the male is sitting on top of the female like that, she's in an extremely vulnerable position. Male wants to cause harm, all he has to do is just sink his canine on the back of the neck. So as he ejaculates, the female swirls around and often slaps the male on the face, and he always tries to get out in a hurry, otherwise he ends up being clawed by her. This is again MENA's data. That tells you something, that lions mate throughout the year. You can see cubs being born through the year, and you can see that the bulk of the cubs are born late winter, early summer. And that's again, we think a good ecological adaptation. That's the time when water becomes scarcity, prey tends to aggregate around scarce water, increasing the hunting success of lionesses. Of course, lionesses in a pride try to synchronize and give birth more or less at the same time. Females can go out to hunt, we're leaving one or two females to look after the cubs. A single female can suckle cubs of other females. So there is a lot of cooperative behavior that's happening out there. MENA's data again, males do not hesitate to kill cubs, especially soon after they've taken over, because those cubs are sired by the males they have disposed. And the whole idea on taking over a pride is to gain access to females and to pass on their genes. Here, this 2002-2003 data set tells you how high infanticide can be. Out of all the cub mortality recorded in that year, 55% was due to infanticide. This is not at all unusual, male lions carrying injuries like this. There is, unfortunately, a tendency to kind of rescue these animals, to treat them. There's a huge hospital in Sasan, but it begs the question as to what should be the type and level of intervention from a management perspective. Males are fighting machines. Territorial males are there to fight and defend territory, and hence they will pick up injuries like this, but they're quite robust animals, and they have ways of healing. Coalition males patrolling, that's what they do bulk of the waking hours. Walking along normally human-made paths like this. This is a dust road. Bulk of the road network is dust roads in Gir. Clear views, soft sand, and they quite they do cut across forest, and even there, if there are man-made paths, that would be. This was a boon for researchers like Meena and me, because it left a trail for us to follow, and it enabled us to catch up with our study animals. And what are they defending? Females and their young that they have sired. Now, lions have two visiting cards. One is a short duration, long distance visiting card, which is the roar. And here you can see a lion sitting and roaring. Lions can roar when they're sitting, lions can roar when they're lying down, lions can roar when they're walking, when they're standing, to have an impact on them. And territorial males on an average again can roar 3-4 times an hour, and they will start roaring soon after sunset and go on well after the sun has risen. And that's their way of announcing that, guys, don't mess with us. We are here, we are strong, and we will defend. So that's the message going out to the pride, and coalition males is very different. Saying, hi buddy, I'm here, we are strong, we'll look after you. So depending on who the recipient of the message is different. The other visiting card they have, long duration, short distance visiting card, which is the scent marking. So lions, when they're patrolling, can every 15-20 meters, they will go to a tree or a rock and squirt a little bit there. And each lion has its own unique signatures. So when other males come by, they're able to smell and recognize whether it was lion A or lion B that's gone by, whether it's a coalition male or it's some other male. So that's the way they mark their territories. Unlike human beings who want to build walls and fences and spotlights and so on, lions have this way, and all large cats have this way of marking and demarcating their territory. This goes back to 1988. Dr. John Singh, my PhD supervisor and India's first properly trained wildlife biologist, to my left in blue, and the person sitting to his left and right at the picture is me with one of our radio-collared animals. We radio-collared 8 lions, and this is just long-term study of using radio collaring of lions. We had fairly simple tools. Here, our stretcher was a wooden frame interwoven with coir rope. We had a dial balance hung from a tree to weigh it. My wonderful field crew whom we couldn't have done our work, and my colleague with the peak cap, Jamal, who was studying the ungulates. And the radio collar, once the collar goes on, the impact on the researcher's life is completely different. Especially in an undulating habitat like this, I had to climb hills, multiple hills every day to get a good signal, to locate the animal, largely by actually going and physically seeing it and not so much by triangulation. Simply because when you see lions, you get so much more data. Which are the other lines with it? What kind of habitat it is in? What kind of activity is involved in? So I used radio tracking primarily as an easier way of locating my study lion animals rather than merely putting dots on a map. But dots on the map are important. This is again Mina's data. Radio telemetry is the only way you can get these kind of maps. Here you see a location where the lion was born, which is natal territory. Then it moves to tenure 1, then to tenure 2 and tenure 3. And without radio tracking, keeping track of these animals in the wild is almost impossible. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're telling you a story. More sophisticated analysis techniques are now available, which are giving us much better insights into their habitat use and ranging patterns. So this is Mina's data. You have there the mean group size of male coalition as small as 1.4. Males, as I told you, rarely associated with female pride, but they are very much interested in female pride and will give their life to defend the prides. Infanticide was quite high during the time Mina was there, and some estimates of their home range. Now, we're talking of lions not just within the protected area, or also very much outside the protected area. And this maps gives you a sense of what we are talking about. So the map on the left top corner of the slide, this is the Gir protected area. And then you have patches here and all over where lions are found. And to give, for foreigners who are not familiar with India, this is the map of India. And this is the Gujarat state, which is westernmost state. And this is the Saurashtra Peninsula, which is pictured here. Sorry, just give me a minute. So the two lower maps kind of zooms in to habitats way outside the protected area, gives you a very good idea as to what the distribution of vegetation is. The vegetation natural vegetation that you find in these patches is very, very small, fragmented and scattered. These are essentially villages and towns and industrial parks and harbor, and there are pictures now of lions in shipping container yards and so on and so forth. And I'll hopefully be able to show you a couple of videos to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. This is where now an estimate of 300 to 400 lions are living. They are living primarily of livestock. And again, I hope to show you a couple of videos to give you a sense of what is the current situation, both for lions as well as people in this Saurashtra Peninsula. This is a map based on the census of 2015. And you can see from their numbers itself, I think the number last time was 573. Of which only 304 is within the protected area. Let's include the 11 of Pania also. So 315 was within the protected area. The majority of the remaining lions are on human-dominated habitats. You have them by district. There are blue lines demarcating their distribution. So you can see what's happening to the lion population. Just a few pictures to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Here are a couple of villagers on motorbikes and a sleeping lioness in an open rural road. And this is, of course, within the forest. Lions have to navigate roads, traffic, and also railway lines. There are maybe three railway lines cutting across the protected area, and here is a male lion crossing. It's not unusual for lions to be run over, but it's not also very common. Typically, on an average, every couple of years, 1 or 2 lions get run over by trains, both within the protected area as well as outside the protected area. So now I'm going to try and show you the videos. Just hold on. David, did you get to see it? David?
No, not yet.
Not yet. This time?
Yeah, it's done. Thank you.
So just to make sure you actually get a good view of it. David, were you able to see that?
Yes, yes, we are able to see.
Okay, so I seem to have figured out the technology. And the last video. Do you have the blank screen, David?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that's videos of the dozens that are going around. which gives you a sense of what is life for people in and around Gir, as well as for lions outside of Gir. And I've not shown the more gory ones. I think this is good enough to give people a sense of what's happening. Lions are large cats. These are dangerous. They can and will attack people. Let these videos not give anybody the impression that, or some of the earlier photographs give the impression that lions are large pussycats. They are not. Typically, lions on an average attack about 15 people a year, of which about 2 of them die. Occasionally, there are spikes in these attacks, and I'm presenting a data set with which I was involved. We gathered data based primarily on Forest Department records between 78 and 91, and that's the average that you have up there. 87 to 88, 2 years back-to-back, extremely severe drought. And if we segregated the data as pre-drought and post-drought, what you get is, on an average, only about 7 people are attacked and less than 1 person dies every year prior to the drought. After the drought, look at how high the attack rate went up. 40 attacks a year and about 7 people dying. And 7 of those 20 who died were actually fed upon by lions. So this is often forgotten. And going through historical literature, we found a reference to something similar in the early 20th century, roughly about 100 years before we recorded this information. Difficult to actually explain what's happening because we are not observing the actual event. Gathering data on something like this, especially from the people involved, is not very easy. This is absolute tragedy, just being attacked. Forget when people die. But to give you a sense of what is happening, it's largely taking place outside the forest, as this data will tell you. One, we recorded in 88 and 89, 2 out of the 3 years, a very high seasonality. Bulk of the attacks were taking place during the monsoon. And 82% of these attacks were taking place outside the protected area. You look at some of the distances out there. 50% were within 10 kilometers, 75% was within about 18 kilometers, and 95% was as far away as 32 kilometers. I mean, so it gives you a sense of how far these attacks were. The pre-drought, if I'll show you a map to explain this, the spatial distribution of attacks was random. But after, when the attacks went up, these were clustered around little chicken necks of protected area going out into village and revenue land. And the attacks were closer to lion baiting sites. Lions used to be baited till 88 for tourists. And that seems to, we don't know what impact it had. And both those two factors from an analysis showed that they were acting independently. So here is the pre-drought map of the attacks. The dark circles, fully black circles are of injuries, and the open circles are of deaths. To me, an attack is bad enough. I don't think a lion attacks somebody to say, I'll only injure or I'll only kill or something like that. It's good fortune when people are able to escape with injuries. So that gives you an idea of its distribution, and look at how it changes in the 3 years post-drought. You see the bulk of the attacks taking place around this chicken neck and around this chicken neck. Now, switching gears, moving now from ecology and conflict more into the translocation, the big conservation question. This is a picture of Kuno River, a major tributary of the Chambal. It's a perennial tributary. And some pictures to give you a sense of the richness and diversity of the habitat. Bamboo forest, dense grasslands. But when we did the survey in the early 90s, it was certain parts of it were overrun by livestock. There were many villages in there. But what Kuno has going for it is it's part of a large forest area, 3,800 square kilometers, very unusual in India. And at that point of time, the forest, the protected area was roughly in the region of about 5 kilometers. And we have recommended it to be expanded, and not so long ago, that has also happened. I think the current protected area is roughly in the region of 800 square kilometers. So these are pictures from 93, 94. Now, the translocation story has a long history. As far back as in the early 50s, when the Indian Board for Wildlife was constituted, even in its first meeting, this topic came up. Dharmkumar Singhji, who was a prince from Saurashtra, who was a member of IBWL, who was a well-known naturalist, very famous, he mooted this idea. And in the early 60s, 2 females and a male were captured, put on a train, and taken all the way to Banaras, Varanasi. And soon after, they were transported to a place called Chandraprabha. At that point of time, Chandraprabha was about 108 square kilometers. They put them in a fenced area for a few weeks, and then they released. The only report that exists reports that 3 lions grew to become 11, and then they disappeared. Obviously, lions don't disappear. 100-odd square kilometers was too small a place for the growing population. Lions should have ventured out. They should have largely been feeding on cattle outside. And those are the days when we didn't have the Wildlife Protection Act, and landowners and zamindars all had guns, and they would have shot these lions. And this is only somewhat sensible guessing, because we don't have actual records. So 56, 70 years ago, people realized the importance of translocation, the need to establish multiple free-ranging wild populations of wild lions. But from the early 80s, this has become more of a political problem than a conservation science issue, to the extent that all political parties have taken more or less a similar stance against translocation. They have passed a resolution in the state assembly. They're using emotional issues like Gujarati pride to kind of build an opposition. There is no room for an informed and open debate or discussion. And they advance ecological and conservation arguments, but that's more from an obstructionist point of view with limited or flawed understanding. And there has been very little willingness to engage with facts or reason. And there is a definite atmosphere of fear to openly discuss this. And I would strongly place this on the court of Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Government of India, Gujarat Forest Department, and to some extent the MP Forest Department, for a variety of failures over the last 2-3 decades. To me, it is really a question for India to answer whether it's a law-abiding society. 15th of April 2013, the Supreme Court passed a judgment ordering the translocation within 6 months. Today, we are in early May 2020, a full 7 years after that judgment. And all we have are reasons, excuses given as to why cannot take place. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip through a lot of this, but anybody interested, I can share the Supreme Court judgment. It should be available in public domain. It's a very, very far-reaching, lot of foresight, very strong support for conservation. The language they've used in that is wonderful. And I would really urge people, Indians especially, to take a good look at the conservation opportunities that this judgment gives. Where are we? The Gujarat government almost immediately filed what's called as a review petition, and that's their right. It's well within their right to file a review petition. The Supreme Court did not entertain that. And then their final legal option was to file a curative petition. But even that was not entertained. So from about August, September of 2013, the original judgment of April 2013 stands. An expert committee had to be constituted, which it was. I and several other conservationists and scientists and government officials are members of it. We've had several meetings of it, the last of which was held in December 2016 in Kuno, where we all came back convinced that Kuno is more than ready. It's teeming with wildlife, it's well protected, the vegetation has made a remarkable recovery. But more recently, there was a move in the Wildlife Board, State Wildlife Board of Madhya Pradesh to consider reintroducing tigers in Kuno, which I don't think is such a great idea. And more recently, the Supreme Court has in some sense walked back certain provisions of the April 2013 judgment with reference to the introduction of African cheetahs by asking for a more scientific report for it to take a final call on it. A public-spirited citizen in 2014 filed a contempt petition saying 2013, the order was for lions to be translocated in 6 months. It's more than a year now. How come they're not translocated? Justice turned a little slowly in India. The first hearing was only in November 2017. And the final hearing in this case was in March 2018, when the government got away more or less by saying that we are going to hold a meeting next week. And there has been very little movement after that, and the expert committee hasn't met since December 2016. The Gujarat government, in submissions to the Gujarat High Court, has admitted to 184 deaths of lions in 2016 and 17 due to, and of this due to unnatural causes of 32 lions. More recent reports indicate deaths of 413 lions, of which at least 35% of which was due to disease. Some of you may be aware in 2018, outbreak of canine distemper virus was confirmed. At least 30 lions died, and more than 30 lions were taken into captivity for treatment, and they remain in captivity. So functionally, they are no longer wild lions. More recently, from January, it is reported at least 10 lions have died due to disease, and more lions have been taken into captivity for treatment. So it really begs the question is, what is the level of intervention are we going to do? How are we going to manage this population? Especially from the video, you get a good sense of that. What is the interaction of lions with livestock, people, and thereby increasing exposure to diseases? The last part of my talk, this is the first picture of a lion I took, December of 1985. I hail from South Indian state called Tamil Nadu. I learned Hindi in school, but I was never very good at it. And so when I went into look at lions here, I had my broken Hindi, and the local boy who's my guide was speaking the local dialect of Gujarati called Kathiawadi. But we got along 3-4 days, and I saw lion tracks, I saw lion droppings, plenty. I saw lion kill remains, but I heard them roar at night and early morning, but I couldn't see a lion. And I was getting pretty desperate. I mean, if I had to study an animal and I was not going to see them, how was I going to do it? And these are pre-camera trapping and remote sensing and all that. I mean, this is now 85. And last walk in the evening, so it was getting to be dusk, and out of the bush, 4 lions came out. And this is the first time I was seeing a large cat at such close quarters, and I was scared. So I kind of asked this boy, what should I do? He said, no, just keep quiet. So I kept quiet, not only kept quiet, more or less held my breath and stood still. That's when I realized I had a camera, I had a pair of binoculars, and I should put it to use. By the time I could focus and get a picture, 3 of those lions had disappeared, and then I got this one. First lion picture, so quite proud of it. It took me about 6 months to do this. This is not trying to be Tarzan or Phantom, but this is just what our study methods require. Deer is fairly dense habitat. You need to identify individual animals, which is by, we say, spot patterns, scars and tears on the face and ears. You need to get close. Even if you have a powerful telescope or binoculars, which anyway I did not have, the vegetation would obscure. So you often had to go 15, 20 meters or even closer to get a view of them. You don't have to get so close to study, but you do silly things when you're young. And that's an adult male sleeping. And I'm taking the picture, and you can see my own shadow to the left of the frame. These are not risks I would take. Like I don't see a sleeping lion and run up so close. These are somewhat what I call negotiated settlements. I've been observing this lion for more than a couple of hours before I could slowly inch my way, creep up. And even then, he's keeping an eye on me. You can see half open eye. Here is a radio-collared subadult animal lying down in a hot summer evening, sleeping. I take this picture, he hears the camera click and look at his reaction, not of alarm, but of curiosity. Conservation in India continues to be challenging. Here you are dealing with Asia's sole surviving population of lions. And this is the boundary of the national park. This road runs along the boundary of the national park. What do you see? A public transport bus on the same road as wild lions during daytime. Last couple of slides. I take every single opportunity to talk about these lions because these are special animals. They've given me a purpose to live. I've given me most wonderful experiences, and this gives me an opportunity to share it. But I also worry because most Indians, even after listening to a talk like this, when they ask questions, would say, "Sir, by the way, what about that tiger? What was it doing?" People in their subconscious even Indians haven't registered that India is home to Asiatic lions. I just hope amongst the audience, there are people who get to appreciate the special nature of these animals, but more importantly, would take up cudgels and support its conservation, whatever is required. Because unless the public stands up for this species and much more for biodiversity and nature, we are not going to have it surviving in the kind of manner in which they need to survive. I have talked primarily about lions at prey and occasionally about leopards, but Gir is also a land of wonderful landscapes, and many of us don't get a chance to look at sunset. Finally, I owe a ton of gratitude to Gujarat Forest Department, which gave me access and permission, the Wildlife Institute of India, which supported it, Meena, who shared a lot of the data, my wonderful team of field assistants, and wonderful friends, Manoj Dolakia, Kalyan Verma, Yogendra Shah, and a more recent friend, Narendra Mojidra, who's been keeping me so well informed of what's happening locally, especially outside the park, and largely through whom I have access to all the videos I showed. Thank you, David. That's all I have in the form of a presentation. I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. I just opened the chat box, so those who have questions, they can come and ask the questions. I have, in fact, already got 1 or 2 questions, if you don't mind to answer those. Sir, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Considering the present population of lions originated from just 12 individuals, are their genetic diversity strong enough to prevent any inbreeding related issues?
There is one reasonably good genetic study. It does show that the Gir population, when compared to African lions, are inbred, but there is very little we can do about it. This is what we have. We just have to learn to live with it. But if you've looked at all these lion pictures, they look as lions should look. It's a very well-breeding population. Cub survival is good. They hunt wild animals. So I don't think we should overplay the genetic card.
Okay. There's another question from Rajesh Puttamasya. What is your view on reintroduction of lions from captivity into the wild, especially the Indian context? Is it possible? If yes, what are the challenges?
First, it will be in contempt of court because there's a standing order of the Supreme Court to translocate from the wild. So I don't think I want to say anything that will bring me in contempt of court.
Okay. And another question, most data from the seems to be pre-2005. Is any study being continued in present times, and how does it compare with your data?
There are more behavioral and evolutionary biology studies. I don't have access to that data, and I haven't seen, but I can be corrected. I've also in general moved on in life. This is more my passion and interest. I'm not a full-time researcher anymore, so I'm not able to answer that question.
Okay. There's a lot of questions are piling up. So we can also go through it. And
Okay.
there's a question from Soumya Banerjee. Dear sir, what do you think the current method of population estimation of Asiatic lions? Are they valid and reliable? And since you mentioned they can be identified individual using certain physical features, can mark recapture used?
Okay. How do I even begin to answer this? Even the Wildlife Institute of India has been kept out of what was planned for this May. So the census methods are somewhat known, but the problem is that the data is not known. So we don't know how the data is collected, what analysis it is done. So there is a problem there. But people who work and are familiar with that area, they seem to think that the actual estimates might be an underestimate and not an overestimate.
Okay. And there's a question from Keshavmurthy. How many prides does a male manage? In Africa, I have seen one male managing at least 2 prides.
It could happen, multiple prides, but given the densities at which they're existing in India, I suspect, I would think that largely the majority of the times a male coalition is only dealing with one pride.
Okay. One question from Srikumara Menon. How fast the government giving compensation for livestock?
It's reasonably good, but the problem is that the amount that's paid is often not the market value. So people do have a problem with that.
Okay. Has lion and tiger territories overlapped?
Yes, I also see that question from Sridhar Patsardi saying that have lions and tigers coexisted ever? Now, if you look at the distribution map I had, clearly they should have existed in the same landscape. They might not have existed in the exact spot, but they definitely probably had some overlapping distribution. And the way they would have partitioned habitats would be for the lions to occupy the drier, more open, flatter habitats, and for the tigers to occupy the more undulating, denser, and wetter habitats. Palamu, close to Palamu, there are reports of lions being killed. And we all know Palamu is a tiger reserve. And lions have existed not far from Delhi. People, British soldiers on horseback, are gone from Red Fort and hunted lions in what is today Palam Airport. So, it gives you a sense of how widely spread they were.
Okay, there's a question from Sarat. Your data percentage livestock kill in 1993 was just 25%. What would you be now? Both within PA or outside PA?
Outside PA will be very, very high. Within PA, I don't, Sharata, unfortunately, I don't have access to the data. There's one question from Karthik. What about the fossil tooth record from Sri Lanka? Karthik, I am not familiar with it. Let's take it up bilaterally.
Okay, there's an interesting question from Punacha. Where was the lions found last in India apart from Gir?
The last record was in Madhya Pradesh, I think in a place called Guna, 1888.
Okay. Okay, there's a question from Dia. My long-standing question. We are historically a lion country, but in present scenario, we have tigers. So how did this happen? How did the lions get pushed in Gujarat only and it stopped also? The tiger number growing in that area.
I don't quite understand the question because the lions never existed south of the Narmada. Tiger, and don't forget, we are now talking about 140, 150 years ago only. So on an evolutionary time scale, it's a very, very short period of time. So lions and tigers and leopards and snow leopards, I mean not snow leopards, leopards and these three species have had some level of overlapping distribution. Uh, tigers have existed from Kanyakumari all the way up to Himalayas and all the way from Sundarbans into habitats in Gujarat and Rajasthan. So they've had a pan-India distribution. Lions were only in north and central India. So if Dia can ask it in a different way, I will be able to answer it, but I'm not able to get what exactly is the question.
Okay. Sir, one from Manish Paul. What do you, what do you think about the plan of introduction of African cheetah? A lot of people are asking that question. In Kunu Wildlife Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh.
What is the?
What do you What do you think about the plan of introduction of African cheetah to Kunu Wildlife Sanctuary? So, what do you think the interaction is going to be if
Okay.
both the lions and cheetahs are introduced the same place?
I don't think that is the problem. The problem really is why do we want to get African cheetahs to India? And what should be our frame of reference from a conservation prioritization basis? Resources are scarce. Always conservation doesn't get what it requires. And especially in a post-COVID-19 scenario where all our economies, the traditional way we look at economies and measure economies are all going down, conservation resources are going to get scarcer. Do we want to invest in getting and introducing African animals into India, or should we rather focus on protecting and doing a better job of conserving species that are already found and native to this land? That really is the question. Ecologically, I don't see a problem of lions and cheetahs surviving together.
Okay, sir, there's a question from Karthikeyan Vasudevan. Sri Lanka had lions 35,000 years ago. What factors led to large-scale extinction in large geographical area? How other big cats survived and lion did not?
In Sri Lanka, again, Karthik, this is something I'm getting a little rusty here, so I'm not able to answer that question. Let's take it bilaterally. It'll be an education for me. But I don't know of any record of tigers, for instance, in Sri Lanka. Clearly, leopards are there. So the way I understand it is, with no record of lions in India south of Narmada, I doubt whether it is modern lions or cave lions. I don't know what lions we are talking about in Sri Lanka, but we'll discuss that. But tigers, at least four-legged tigers, were never found in Sri Lanka. So leopards have crossed before the ocean came up. So and lions came to India much after tigers came to India. So in that kind of time frame, I don't think modern lions were ever found in Sri Lanka. There is somebody called Lalavala. Are there two subspecies of lions in Gir? The answer is no. There's only one. It's called Panthera leopersica. Karthik asked, are there any known disease episodes recorded for Asiatic lions? Most definitely, canine distemper virus in 2018. I have the official reports of the National Institute of Virology. Unfortunately, after it was in the public domain for whatever reason, they were taken down and never came back in public domain, but I just happened to have downloaded it. So I know that. But in general, our postmortem and disease epidemiological capacity are all challenged. We don't do a good enough job. We get things like kidney failure, heart failure, respiratory disease. We need to do a much better job of actually pinning down, taking samples, doing proper analysis so that we can really get good results.
Okay, there's one more question from Karthikeyan Vasudevan. If you are to point out at one important measure to ensure that the population survives long term, which one would it be?
Implement the Supreme Court order on translocation. I mean, that's easy. And forget my opinion. It's the law of the land. It's a standing order of the Supreme Court. So the time for giving opinions and arguing about it ended once the curative petition of the state government of Gujarat was dismissed by the Supreme Court. We just need to follow the judgment.
Okay. What can be the strategies for conservation of lion habitat outside the Gir protected PA, according to you, especially the satellite population?
After seeing those videos, if there is still There's still a desire to invest more and more in conserving lions outside the park. I worry. What kind of lions and what kind of life for lions do we wish for? Is this the right kind of conservation goal? Lions being barked at by dogs, lions being honked at by vehicles, lions feeding in paved streets under street lights, and I could go on and on. I mean, and there are cases of people playing with lions. There is one horrendous video of a guy with a half-live chicken, and he, like you play with your kitten at home with a ball of wool, he keeps shaking it and the lioness keeps following it. So, I mean, if you were to live in this habitat, I am not sure you would so strong. I mean, anybody living in that habitat is at risk. Fingers crossed, thank God, more people are not getting injured. But less than a year ago, at least one person was killed and eaten. These don't get into the media, but thanks to people like Mojidra, I do hear what's happening. So I'm not so sure that thanks to the local people, lions are able to survive. Thanks to the Gujarat Forest Department, lions are able to survive. But I'm not so sure that this is the best way for lions to survive. And these are not places from which people can be relocated. We're talking of hundreds of thousands of people, highly developed infrastructure, and vast, I mean, hundreds of thousands of hectares of agriculture, productive agriculture field. So in some sense, you're tempting fate, either from a people losing patience perspective, but more importantly, a disease perspective. Cattle carry diseases, dogs carry diseases, all kind of other domestic animals carry diseases, people carry diseases. Domestic animals die. Very often we don't know why they are dying. And that's the kind of animals these lions are feeding on. And it's not difficult for them to pass on to lions in the park. All it takes is a single contact with a lion coming in and going out. And then you have these. And with so little transparency, so little formal data collection on mortality, we don't have a handle on what's happening. David, there's a question here from, all I can say is Redmi. How important is the local community coordinating with conservation? Absolutely important. Not just in Gir, but anywhere in India and all around the world. I don't think we can really achieve successful and long-term conservation without getting the local people on your side.
Just probably quickly roll through it. I mean, you can choose 4, 5. I mean, those who have more questions, you can actually write to him. Probably so you can put down your email ID there down.
Yeah, I'll just put that down to everyone.
Sir, I have a question. I mean, there's some rumors like lions never been in India. It is actually been introduced from Africa. What is your take on that?
I don't believe that. I will leave it at that.
Okay.
Given the natural history evidence, the ecological evidence, the genetic evidence, I don't. There's a question, are cheetahs coming in exchange of lions from Iran? I don't think it's a good idea to go and take cheetahs from Iran. Those numbers are really low and they live in high mountains. Very often they are living with what's snow also. So that's they will not adapt so easily, and it's a very small population. So I don't think that's a great idea. Maybe 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when the cheetah population has come up, who knows what we can do.
There's a question from Ashok. What do you think about the translocation within the Gujarat, a lake and Barda sanctuary?
What is preventing them from doing it? You could have done it, right?
Right.
So again, what does the Supreme Court order say? Why are we bringing up all of this? Are we a law-abiding society or not? These, I mean, we should not be asking wildlife conservation questions now. We should be asking of the Indian society, are we a law-abiding society? I mean, do we respect and accept the Supreme Court of India?
So there's a question from Anam Hassan. What is the rate of survival change when they are inside the and outside the park?
We don't have data. We don't have data. No data. Is there a threat to livestock and humans around Gir by leopards? Yes. Then there's a lot of thank you stories. Sarat, a PL has already been filed in Supreme Court. The court has given an order to implement the translocation. What else can we do as citizens to put pressure? Write to the Chief Minister of Gujarat, write to the Prime Minister of Gujarat, write to the Minister of Environment. We run petitions for so many things. Make it count. And don't let it go. Write in the media, talk to the media, make it something that, what shall I say, something that hits the headlines. I don't think we should keep going back to the court. I think it's now trying and work with Gujarat public opinion. There are Gujaratis who still live in Gujarat as well as outside Gujarat who really see the value of translocation, who are supporting translocation. We need to work with them and more people to get them to see the value of this. At no point in time trying to undermine what Gujarat has done. It's about managing the success that Gujarat has done. It's about, I mean, Gujaratis by nature are such a charitable community. We should appeal to their charitable instincts. Give a few lions on loan. It doesn't even have to become the property of Madhya Pradesh. It can continue to be the property of Gujarat. Give it on loan. And it's only, as I've said for years, it's only like buying life insurance. Fortunately, the 2018 canine distemper virus did not have a widespread impact. But if it had, what would we be doing now? To translocate after an event like that, a widespread mortality would be stupid. We should do it when we have the success, when we have the numbers of lions, when there is so many anyway dying. And during translocation, there would be a few deaths. That doesn't mean translocation is not important or is not what needs to be done. There is a risk in all of this, but not doing it is a much greater risk, and as I've said multiple times, also in breach of the Supreme Court order.
There's an interesting question that Dinal Samrasinghe, I think from Sri Lanka. Some of the lion fossils found in Sri Lanka were later identified to be a tiger. And now it's established the Bengal tiger was, so the presence of lion is doubtful, he's saying.
Okay, okay, I can see that, I can see that. Karthik says, why can't we introduce conservation bred Asiatic lions in Kuno? I don't even know what that means. Primarily trying to teach a lion to hunt as well as to handle a carcass and navigate its habitat is an enormous task. When you have a surplusing population in the context of Gir and a standing order of the Supreme Court to try and consider any other way of doing it is not something I feel comfortable.
Okay. How did Asiatic lions didn't go past India? Were they found in Southeast Asia before?
Can you repeat that again?
How did the Asiatic lion didn't go past India? Were they found Southeast Asia before?
No. The furthest east they went was Bihar, and the furthest south they went was River Narmada. Who knows? At that point of time in the early to mid 80s, primarily human beings stopped their spreading. And also habitats further east are not really suitable for lions, and they were full of tigers. Okay? Unlike in Africa where you don't have another large cat of the size of lions, In Asia, you have a tiger. So in Africa, lions have existed from the Atlas Mountains in the north all the way to the Cape of Good Hope, traversing all kinds of habitats, including dense rainforests. So in Africa, Asia, you have the tiger.
Okay, there's a question from Mohammed Kadri. Hi, Dr. Ravi, nice to hear you after 40 years. One question, how was the baiting contributed to lions hunting out of protected area?
I don't think baiting contributed because lions were anyway killing livestock even within the park. Outside the park, where is the prey? I mean, lions need food like all of us do. So there's not much of a chance for them to encounter wild prey. So they just have to attack and kill livestock.
Okay, probably we can take 3 more questions. It's almost 8:45.
Okay, I can see one from Shanti saying, how many lions should be translocated when the project finally goes through? And any idea when it might happen? That I don't have an idea, but I can tell you there is a clear plan, which is sitting with the government of India and has been shared with state government of Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. To begin with, you're talking of a pride of anything between 6 to 8 animals and the dependent young. And over the next 10 to 15 years, maybe even up to 20 years, an occasional movement of a couple of adult males from Gir to Kuno, just to make sure that there is sufficient gene flow and you don't have founder effects and there is same problems that would come from a genetic bottleneck. So in the context of the current population, current mortality, the number of lions that are required for translocation is very, very small.
Okay, so probably you can go through the list. You can choose 2 more questions and then we can stop.
Are there lion and leopard conflicts? Punachan. Well, I don't know what you mean by lion and leopard conflict. I'm understanding it as whether lions and leopards actually get into a fight. No leopard will initiate a fight with a lion simply because it's just too small. And its first instinct is to escape, and primarily it escapes by climbing a tree. Occasionally, leopards are caught by lions when they creep up and the leopard is not aware that it's close by. And it could be a young leopard, it could be an adult leopard. And if that happens, the lion will kill and sometimes even eat the leopard. There are some jokes. I will not enter into that. What triggered and motivated you to study lions? Okay, in the 80s, there were only so many opportunities. I studied botany in college and then was a marketing executive for a couple of years. And then I heard about this college in South India, which offered a master's in wildlife biology, and that's what I went and did. And then Wildlife Institute of India in July of '85 advertised for about half a dozen researcher posts. And one of that was the Lion Project. I applied for 2 or 3 projects, I remember. There was an elephant project, there was a lion project, and I forget what the third one was. I seem to have done well. They offered me all 3 projects, and I just felt the lion, from a conservation perspective, felt very, very attractive to me, and that's the reason I chose the lion.
Is there any important question, sir? Can you
just one second,
Okay.
Any poaching case of Asiatic lion in Gir? Yes, but nothing that we need to worry about, in the sense that, I mean, every single case is worrying, but nowhere in the scale of rest of India. Largely, the protection is very good. Largely, the people are accepting, and they don't allow poachers to operate out of there. How well are ex situ conservation breeding do apart from bringing? I am not very sure. I'm out of touch. But when I was in the Wildlife Institute, we kind of set up the first stud books for lions. Of course, earlier genetic studies had showed how India had mixed African and Asian lions, and since then we've been careful. There's a fairly robust population of captive Asiatic lions, especially Sakarbagh Zoo, which is in Junagadh, is world famous for that. I'm assuming they're doing good. yes, Punacha, there is a lot of private tourist players in Gir, much more than the time I was there. And it's just a problem. They are setting up fenced areas, areas that are lit up. And today I can't, I mean, the last time I went there was, of course, in 2013. I can't even recognize Sasan village. There is 24/7 noise, electricity, lot of traffic, and a whole, I mean, there are dozens of tourism resorts all over the place. There is a student studying zoological science and wants to pursue PhD. What are the chances? Oh, the chances are very bright. It's really a question of whoever is interested, coming up with the right questions, raising the money and getting the permissions to do it. Then wonderful, okay. Yeah, the Recognition of Forest Rights Act seeks to recognize rights of dwelling. Can it aid human-wildlife conflict? Anish, let's take this bilaterally. I don't think it's quite restricted to the presentation I made. I'm happy to chat with you. I've sent you my email, so please write to me. What kind of contact are possible between dogs? This is Omkar, a lion outside PA, as there's also mention of dogs. See, one is when livestock dies, lions will scavenge on it, dogs will also scavenge on it. So it might not be even direct contact, but body fluids and saliva and those kind of contacts. Of course, in one of the videos, if you had heard, you would have heard dogs bark and the lion ran away. So they are operating very, very close, close quarters. They don't, and the chances of them actually having physical contact are very, very high. Lions would occasionally kill and eat dogs, but that's not a major prey for them. David, if you want to call it a day, I'm fine, but I'm also happy to go on. It's up to you.
Probably take one more question, sir. Last question,
Okay.
then we'll stop. Yeah, it's
how has the relationship of Maldari people and lion changed over a period of time? I'm not so sure it has changed very much. I think, but I'm no expert at this point of time because my relationship and actual work in Gir has stopped many, many years ago. But from what I hear from friends and others, it just seems to be Maldaris are quite comfortable. They know how to behave with lions. They're quite accepting of the fact that they get so much from within the forest that losing an occasional livestock to lions is just part of the deal. They don't have an issue at all. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. I hope it was useful and enjoyable. David, I have a request. Is there any way that we can copy the chat messages or save the chat messages in some form?
I don't know. I have taken few pictures, sir. I'll send it to you.
Yes.
Before we
Yes,
stop
with
this.
the recording, with the recording, we will get a list of stats.
Okay, sir, can you copy those? I don't know. If it's...
Who is recording? Karthik is recording, I think.
Okay, sir. Okay. Anyway, sir, thank you so much, sir. It was wonderful to hear you, and it's good to see you talk passionately about lions. We can actually feel that you love that animal so much. Anyway, on behalf of Kottayam Nature Society and Alappuzha Naturalist Society, we extend our thanks and thank you so much. And those who are listening, please keep on watching our more sessions. Stay safe and stay healthy.
David, just one question. How do I know what the program is? Is there an online, is a website or something I can find?
I'll keep on post you, sir. I'll keep on posting.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everybody at Alappuzha and Kottayam for making this happen. Wonderful initiative.
Thank you so much. Good night, guys. Bye.